Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to get started. This is the webinar for Plug-in America's 2025 EV Driver Annual Survey. I want to welcome you all. Next slide, please. So this is our agenda for today. Next slide. So let me start out with a few housekeeping details. This webinar is going to be recorded and it will be sent out to all of the registrants, and it's also going to be published on our website, so you can find it on the website. If you have questions, you can ask them at any time in the Q&A box. We have someone who's going to be trying to answer questions as we go along. And if you identify yourself in your question, if we don't get to it during the course of the webinar, we will get back to you afterwards and try to get you a response to your question. So for those of you, hopefully most or everybody knows who Plug-in America is. If you are not familiar with us, we're a national nonprofit EV advocacy organization. We were founded in 2008, so we have been doing this for a long time. We are dedicated to accelerating the use of plug-in electric vehicles around the United States through education, advocacy, and research. And through our work, we provide practical, objective information to consumers and dealerships and the public and policymakers about EVs through a wide range of different programs. We lead National Drive Electric Week and Drive Electric Earth Day. We have the plugstar.com EV shopping website and a variety of other public outreach events. So my name is Joel Levin. I'm the executive director of Plug-in America. Nick Turner is our EV consumer insights analyst. He did the heavy lifting with this survey, and he's going to be doing most of the presentation today. We also have Alexia Melendez-Martineau, our senior policy manager, and Lindsay Perkins will also be answering questions. She's our director of communications and marketing. So a couple of highlights from the survey. We are very proud that we had over 6,000 respondents altogether, including 5,300 who are EV drivers. This is our largest survey to date. We've been doing this for a while. We also focused on groups that are less represented within the survey at large, and tried to really capture their opinions. Younger EV drivers, female drivers, drivers of color, drivers in multifamily housing. And we had statistically significant numbers of respondents from 4 different states: California, New York, Washington, and Texas. And we're going to be publishing separate reports with findings from those states a little bit later in the year. Next slide. So the report itself is going to be available immediately after the webinar. It'll be on our website. And as I mentioned, we will have separate reports for those states published in a couple of months. So with that, I'm going to hand the baton over to Nick, who is going to start with talking about our methodology and demographics. Nick?
Hi everyone, my name is Nick Turner and I'm a research analyst here at Plug-in America. Today we'll have the pleasure of taking you through the results of our EV driver survey. Our 5th annual EV driver survey was fielded from January of 2025 to March of 2025. It received over 5,300 EV driver respondents, plus an additional total of about 800 respondents who do not drive an EV. About 4,500 of the 5,300 EV driver respondents completed the survey in full. Responses were counted for every question a respondent answered within the survey. The survey is designed to get a full picture of the EV experience in the United States. Within the full report and within this webinar, we'll go through general EV information from our respondents, what influenced their EV purchase and or lease, the charging experience, the buying and leasing experience, and EV driver profiles. We are proud to once again have at least one EV driver respondent in every state in the country. The dark blue states here, California, New York, Washington, and Texas, represent the 4 states with a statistically significant number of respondents. Beyond those states, you can see that states like Florida, Oregon, North Carolina, Illinois, and more received over 100 EV driver respondents. Looking further into the demographics, you can see our respondents are primarily an older and higher income audience. About 84% of respondents reported as white as well. When we are talking about having response totals that veer into 6,000 plus, even smaller percentages indicate a good number of respondents. However, our EV driver profile section within this report and later on in the webinar will give a glimpse into the populations less represented within the survey as a whole. Lastly, we see our survey holds an audience that primarily lives in a single-family home and primarily owns their home residence. Once again, I'd encourage everyone to look into the full report to see the data we have pulled out for those who live in multifamily housing. With that, we will get into the full report and start off with some EV information. Amongst the respondents in our survey, Tesla is once again the most popular manufacturer. 27% of our respondents said their primary EV is a Tesla, while about 18% said their primary EV is a Chevy, and about 13% said their primary EV is a Ford. Now, the popularity of these manufacturers is driven by some of the top models amongst our respondents. The Chevy Bolt was the most popular model amongst our respondents, with about 13% of EV driver respondents saying this is their primary EV. The Tesla Model 3, which was the top model last year in our survey, and the Model Y were second and third this year, respectively, while the Mach-E rounded out the top 4. It's worth noting that these numbers here are not designed to replace sales figures. This is just to give an idea of what our respondents in particular are driving. So we also asked respondents how satisfied they are with their primary EVs in a number of different categories, including an overall satisfaction rating. Much like last year, the Rivian R1T received the highest overall rating among vehicle models, with at least 50 respondents who indicated that this is their primary EV. Also similar to last year, the Rivian R1S had the second highest overall rating, while the Tesla Model S had the third highest overall rating. If you look into the full report, you'll be able to see which vehicles have the highest ratings in categories such as range, comfort, value for the price, and more. There you'll see high ratings for vehicles like the Ioniq 6, the F-150 Lightning, the Chevy Bolt and Equinox, and the 3 vehicles listed here as well. You also see some of the ratings for what we refer to as the emerging vehicles, which are vehicles which had between 20 and 49 respondents who said it is their primary EV. Next, we will move on to what is influencing EV purchases in America. For the 6th year in a row, clean air and environmental protection was most likely to be selected as the most important purchase consideration for our respondents. Just under 40% of EV driver respondents said it is their most important purchase consideration, while 21% of EV driver respondents said the same about cost savings. This is a pretty wide margin here, but I want to point out that this gap between clean air and cost savings continues to shrink ever so slightly year over year. Last year, 41% of EV driver respondents said clean air is the most important consideration, while 19% said cost savings is. This is driven by a few different consumer groups in particular. We see younger drivers are more likely to select cost savings than the general population. We see that EV drivers of color are more likely to select cost savings than the general population. And we see that more recent adopters of EVs are more likely to select cost savings than the general population. While it may be a stretch for cost savings to ever overtake clean air in this question, cost savings is a very noteworthy consideration for these emerging groups of EV drivers. We also want to look at how respondents rate these considerations individually as well. 62% of respondents said that safety is a crucial consideration when choosing to drive an EV, just ahead of the 61% of respondents who said that clean air is a crucial consideration for them. Much like last year, we see that these two considerations are considered must-haves in an EV. It's noteworthy that 5% of people selected safety as the most important consideration, while 62% said it is a crucial consideration. I believe this boils down to the fact that people are just expecting their EVs to be able to provide safety. They don't even want to have to think about it. This, along with helping move towards cleaner air, are the baseline expectations of any EV. Then we see considerations like style, convenience, and cutting-edge technology are more likely to be selected as somewhat important considerations. These are factors that are generally considered as nice to have. Charts like this can help dictate where the focus areas on an EV should be. First, respondents ensure their vehicle is going to help the environment and be safe for them and or their family. Then they start to think about things like how it looks, how convenient it is to drive, and more. Here we have what I think is one of the biggest developments from this year's survey. Just under 92% of EV driver respondents said it is likely or very likely their next vehicle will be an EV, which is just a massive number, obviously. This is up from 89% of EV driver respondents who said the same last year. If you want to find a reason for this, I think the increase in likelihood from younger drivers is one of the main reasons why. Last year, we found that drivers over the age of 65 were extremely likely to make their next vehicle an EV, while drivers under the age of 35 were less likely to do so. This year, that gap has largely been closed. In fact, just under 94% of EV drivers between the ages of 25 and 34 said it is likely or very likely their next vehicle will be an EV. This is the largest among any age range in our survey. We'll look more into the younger EV drivers later on in the webinar. Another factor for the increasing likelihood of EV drivers to remain loyal to EVs is in how concerns drop after experience with an EV. This was one of our biggest takeaways from last year's survey, and we're happy to say the trend has once again showed itself here. In this graph, the lighter blue bar on the left represents respondent concern in each factor at the time they first bought or leased their EV, while the darker blue bar represents respondent concern in each factor now. And the good news is that concern drops in almost every single category after experience with an EV. This is especially true in categories like battery range, price, home charging setup, and more. In fact, the only factor that saw an increase in concern this year was public charging reliability. Even more so than that, we have compared initial concern from last year's survey to initial concern from this year's survey for our respondents, and we have even more good news. Respondents were less likely to report initial concern in almost every single factor in this year's survey. Our data shows that there is less initial concern in EVs than there has been in the past, which means that awareness of EVs is continuing to increase in America. We see some massive drops in categories like battery range, battery warranty, price, and more that speak to the increasing normalization of EVs in the country today. And lastly, we compared concern now from last year's survey to concern now from this year's survey, and once again, it is lower than it was in last year's survey. This is especially true in categories like battery range, battery lifetime, battery warranty, and we even see some of the public charging categories have seen some good decreases in concern since last year. So to put this all simply, respondents are less concerned when they first buy or lease an EV, and we are still seeing those concerns drop after experience with an EV. And we will round out this section with incentives. Once again, we find that inexpensive home charging is the most popular incentive used by our respondents, with about 75% of respondents saying they use or have used this. 63% of respondents say they have used the federal EV tax credit, and about 45% use free public charging at select public locations. This is also the first time we asked about workplace charging and incentives, which are used by about 14% of our respondents. Okay, next we will move on to the charging experience. Amongst all of our EV driver respondents who generally have access to home charging is depended on to provide the consistent charge. 50% of our respondents charge at home daily, while 45% charge at home weekly. We have a sample of respondents who largely have access to home charging, so this may be slightly different than the population of EV drivers as a whole. It makes sense that for those without home charging, public chargers and work chargers are used more frequently. To see information on that, I would encourage everyone to look into the full report. In regards to fast public chargers, we asked respondents if they have consistently experienced any of the following problems at their most used fast charging network over the past year. Overall, we see numbers improving, but there is still a bit of a gap between those using the Tesla supercharger network and those using other charging networks. This is especially true when it comes to broken chargers and not having enough chargers at each location. 21% of drivers who primarily use Tesla chargers reported consistently experiencing broken or non-functional chargers, compared to 62% of those who use other chargers. This is a massive gap, similar to the one that we see for not having enough chargers at each location. One of the larger concerns for Tesla drivers, as it was last year, is a lack of amenities available at each station. This is a valid concern for EV drivers to have, but obviously this may be considered a bit of a champagne problem for those other networks who are worried about their chargers working. We will continue to track these numbers year over year and hope for improvements across the board that make the public charging experience easier. Now, one very positive piece of news in the public charging world is that the availability of public fast chargers is increasing. 65% of respondents said they have a compatible fast public charger within 5 miles of their home residence, up from 57% of respondents who said the same last year. On the other hand, we see that public level 2 chargers are harder to come by. 67% of respondents said they do not have a level 2 public charger within walking distance from their home, compared to 24% of respondents who said that they do. Okay, next we will go into the buying and leasing experience for an EV. So 72% of our respondents said they got their EVs from a dealership, compared to about 25% who said they got it directly from the manufacturer. However, respondents who got their EVs directly from the manufacturer rated the experience higher than those who got their EVs from a dealership. This was especially true in finding the information needed to buy or lease an EV, negotiating, and in post-delivery support and service. Now, those who did get their EV from a dealership said that knowledge of EVs from the dealership could stand to grow. Only 23% of respondents said their salesperson had high knowledge of EVs, compared to about 29% who said their salesperson had low knowledge of EVs. But generally, dealers have little influence on what respondents decide to buy or lease. 85% of respondents said they know exactly what they want to buy or lease when they go to a dealership for a car, which was even up from 79% of respondents who said the same last year. Only 15% said that they even listened to recommendations from the dealer, which is down from the 21% of those who said this last year. So, given that it looks like respondents often know what they want going into a dealership, it becomes even more important to reach consumers before they go to the dealership. We see that automaker websites and EV-specific websites are pretty far and away the most used online resources for our respondents. YouTube is an emerging source, with just over 50% of respondents saying they've used this. YouTube is especially popular among younger EV drivers, signaling it as a source that will continue to grow over the years. Reddit is another online resource with these characteristics, although I will note that the survey was advertised on Reddit, so it follows that people would be more likely to select it as a resource. Lastly, we asked respondents to select the top 3 information resources they find useful for EV research, and some of the same stories emerge. EV-specific websites are far and away the top choice, with 79% of respondents selecting it. Video reviewers were second, with automakers in third. One pretty staggering note is the bottom 3 choices. Auto dealers, government websites, and electric utilities are generally not considered to be useful resources. Government websites in particular are down to 5% from 17% last year. This dichotomy of what is on the top here versus what is on the bottom should send a signal that EV drivers want to do their own research and find sources that give them information from other EV drivers. These are the places to best reach EV drivers before they go to the dealership. So lastly for me, we will go on to the EV driver profile section. So the EV driver profile section is one of the great parts of our survey for 2025. Our survey is primarily composed of the demographics that are largely synonymous with EV adoption so far. It's definitely skewed more towards older drivers, towards white drivers, and towards males. Given that many of these results are primarily being taken from those groups, we wanted to highlight the differences in these answers when it comes to drivers who don't fit into those groups. There is more than the final report, which I'd encourage everyone to read, but for the sake of time here, we will look into the results of younger EV drivers, which means between the ages of 18 and 44 for the purpose of this section. The impact of younger EV drivers is seen throughout the report, and I think that's what makes them such an important group to highlight here. The views and tendencies of younger EV drivers are what will shape the EV movement going forward, which makes it all the more important to understand them. Once again, to see more profiles, I'd encourage everyone to look into the full report. So the most important thing I want to make clear here when looking at the most important purchase considerations for EV drivers between the ages of 18 and 44 is that clean air is still most likely to be selected as the most important consideration. 34% of EV driver respondents between the ages of 18 and 44 said that clean air is most important to them, while 28% said the same about cost savings. This represents a much smaller gap than drivers who are 45 and older, though. This means that to reach younger EV drivers, it is important to both appeal to those interested in clean air and those interested in cost savings. Next, we look at the concerns younger EV drivers had at the time they bought or leased an EV compared to now. Much like the general population, younger drivers saw their concerns dissipate after experience with an EV. This was true in every factor except for the two public charging categories. Younger EV drivers can tend to be more dependent on public charging, so perhaps it makes sense that these would be the categories which do not see drops for this group. And lastly, we look at the online services that younger drivers use to research EVs. Automaker websites are still the top reported service for younger drivers, but we see that YouTube and Reddit rise up as the second and third most popular resources for younger drivers. As I said earlier, we did advertise the survey on Reddit, so it follows that the percentage could be higher than expected for this resource. However, the fact that younger drivers are so much more likely to select it than the general population is a signal that it is an emerging resource in the EV world and one that should be on everyone's radar. Furthermore, we see that social media sites that may be presumed to be synonymous with younger EV drivers are generally not used, for EV research anyway. Instagram, Twitter, and more actually make up the bottom four here for younger drivers, while many of the same top choices emerge as the general population. So now that we've gone through all this data, you may be wondering what this means for the future of EVs in America. To help answer some of those questions, I will pass it on to Alexia, who is the Senior Policy Manager here at Plug in America, to help give some broader takeaways from the data we've shown here today.
Thanks, Nick. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Alexia Melendez-Martineau, and I'm a Senior Policy Manager with Plug in America. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit today about where we go from here. What do we do with this really great information? So next slide, please. So something that was kind of overwhelmingly clear from what Nick just shared is that really top of mind, EV drivers love their cars more than ever. That's pretty obvious from these results, and overwhelmingly want their next car to be electric. Furthermore, we actually saw concerns dropping across the board, which is really positive news that experience with an EV actually leads to increased satisfaction with that vehicle. And then third, we are seeing improved charging reliability and availability across the board, which is really positive as well, because we know that's a key consideration for consumers when they're thinking about either switching to electric or what electric vehicle might work for them. So what do we use in order to make sure that other folks know these really amazing benefits and these great takeaways? Well, some messages to emphasize are that EV drivers enjoy these everyday cost savings that come from the reduced fuel costs and the reduced maintenance cost of EVs. Furthermore, as Nick mentioned, safety is a key consideration when it comes to EV acquisition. Consumers want to know, of course, that their vehicles are safe, and they expect that out of a vehicle. So really highlighting the safety aspects of an EV can go a long way in helping consumers to understand that those vehicles can match their needs and their desires. Furthermore, one thing that we know is that consumers, of course, love to save money. Who doesn't love, reduce costs? And there are tons of incentives out there in order to help acquire an EV and to facilitate your charging experience. And one thing that we really want to continue making sure that folks know is that government and the utility incentives are available. So that is a key message to emphasize, not just making sure that those incentive programs are something that we have available, but that folks know that they are available. Furthermore, we just said this quite a lot, but EV drivers really do love their vehicles, and we've found that to be a really effective message in speaking to potential EV drivers and to newer consumers who are interested but may not take that next step yet to get the EV. And understanding the experience that EV drivers already have had can go a long way to making sure that that newer consumer can feel satisfied and can feel comfortable in the transition. And then lastly, really just kind of the main takeaway with our messaging is to know an EV is to love one. And what that means is more experience with an EV is better across the board. The more that you understand the technology, what the vehicles can provide, and the way that they can support your needs and your lifestyle, the better that you are satisfied with the vehicle and the more likely you will be to, purchase an EV as your next vehicle. Next slide, please. So what does that mean in terms of policies? There are a few that we've highlighted here, and please feel free to look at the main report in order to get a full recap on what we are suggesting. But just a few to kind of leave you with for today is that local governments and local companies, private business can help to lead by example by electrifying local fleets. This is something that can not only help to increase charging infrastructure across the board because more EVs means more charging infrastructure, but also to let people and residents in those areas know that EVs are not only available, but on the roads, that they're normal now, that those are vehicles that you can now have in your garage or on your street. So electrifying local fleets can really go a long way to helping to showcase that leadership. Furthermore, as we've kind of alluded to, a key consideration for drivers, of course, is where am I going to get my charge? How am I going to get my charge? Am I going to be supported in my needs? So expanding charging infrastructure, especially public charging infrastructure, is really key in order to make sure that drivers know that they can get from point A to point B without any interruption. Lastly, incentivizing EV driving and reducing unnecessary road user fees is really key because what we've learned is that EV drivers, of course, love the cost savings that come from EVs, and we don't want those to go away. And so ways that we can reduce those upfront costs for the vehicle to make it more feasible for more folks to go electric, and also to reduce ongoing costs for vehicles like punitive road user fees or unnecessary road user fees will really help to support the cost case for EVs moving forward. So those are, like I said, just a few policies that we wanted to call out that we feel really match what we're seeing from these survey results this year. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, to know an EV is to love one. So what does that look like? How do we get that experience with EVs, and how can we, as a community and as a nation, provide these opportunities to consumers in order to help facilitate that? There are a few things that we can do. On the education side, ride and drive events are really kind of the bread and butter of Plug in America, but also the bread and butter of introducing folks to EVs, giving them a sense of, here are different vehicles that you might want to take a look at. And you know what, by the way, you can just test drive this in a no pressure environment. Our EV support program as well is a really good resource in order to ask any questions that you might have around EV 101, charging, more technical questions around, what kinds of charging infrastructure should I, install in my home, or if I don't have charging infrastructure at home, how can I make sure I charge? We can answer all those questions for you via our EV support program, and we'll have the contact for that on a later slide. Um, Furthermore, our Plugstar EV retailer engagement program, so our Plugstar program, is something that Plug in America has led for quite a few years, and that helps us to really work with sellers of EVs so that they understand here is again EV 101 information. Here's information about charging that they might need in order to equip them to help consumers like you to find the EV that works best for you. And so our PlugStar program is designed for EV retailers and dealers across the country in order for them to, come work with us and to understand, what are these EVs all about and how can I make sure that I'm really accurately communicating this information to my consumers. Lastly, EV storytelling campaigns are really helpful. And wink, wink, Plug-in America has quite a few stories that we would love to share with you all. So feel free to check our website, check our social media accounts. We have a bunch of different stories to share that speak to the different benefits of EVs and really help you to understand why different drivers have decided to go electric, because there are different motivations for each driver, as Nick highlighted in his presentation. And then furthermore, as I've kind of mentioned, Plug-in America offers a variety of resources really centralized around two main ones. We encourage you to go to plugstar.com. That is our all-in-one EV shopping tool. It has vehicles, models, it has charging infrastructure options, it has dealers where you can go to try to acquire the EV that you're looking for. And you can put in what you're looking for out of a vehicle. Like, I want 4 seats in my car, or I want 6. I want to be able to tow. I want to be able to have all-wheel drive. And the tool will be able to tell you, okay, here are all the vehicles that fit your criteria. So we encourage you to visit plugstar.com in order to start your browsing journey. And then lastly, again, just want to highlight the EV support program, because that's going to be a one-stop shop in order to ask any and all questions that you might have when it comes to the EV transition. Next slide, please. So here in the full, we've just given a quick summary of what's in the full report. It is quite full. I would encourage you to take a look at the report when we release it right after this webinar, because it includes not only the EV driver profile that Nick shared today from younger drivers, but also a variety of different profile sections. There are deeper dives into the data that was presented on this webinar, and there's additional demographic information so you can understand just who is responding to this survey. And so, like I said, I would definitely encourage everyone to go and take a look at that after this webinar. Next slide, please. So we've just talked at you for quite a while. Obviously, we want to know what questions that you have, and I know that there have been many that have been put into the chat. So we'll start to address those as we can. We'll answer as many as we can in this hour, and any questions that we can't answer today, we'll do our very best to get back to you, especially if you leave your contact information with that question. So with that, Lindsay, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Alexia, and thank you, Nick, for sharing all of this wonderful information. As Alexia mentioned, please put any questions in the Q&A box, and we will either answer them live or get back to you via email. And the report will be available shortly after the webinar concludes at pluginamerica.org/survey2025. We will also email it to anyone who registered for this, and the YouTube recording, we'll put it on YouTube, and then we will put it on the same page where you download the full report. So you will be able to access this webinar and the report in the same place. So our first question, Nick, is from Thomas Fenwick, and it's about respondent manufacturers. So the EV drivers and the manufacturer of the vehicles they drive. The participant make slide showed a large cohort of about 14% or more of respondents who drove other. And I wondered if you could expand on what other brands participants are driving.
Right, it's a good question. So any brand that had less than 1% of our respondent base was included there. So yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I don't have those ones, but I can certainly, I mean, they should be in the full report, but I can also respond to that question after the webinar too, once I have the data in front of me.
Excellent. And Bridget Gilmore asked a question about vehicle satisfaction. Did you say that the top 3 vehicles for satisfaction were the same this year as last year?
Great question and easy answer. Yes, that is correct. Same as last year.
Okay. And then Brett Wiley asks, can you explain the difference between the 3 graphs around concern, as it sounds like the same population and time period? And this is an especially great question because it does take a second to wrap your brain around the concern graphs.
Right. Yeah. So the first slide there. So we were asking respondents this year. Let's ask respondents this year. So which factors they're concerned about when they first got an EV, and then which factors are they concerned about now? So that was just like all this year's respondents. The second slide, so we were comparing that initial concern from last year's survey to the initial concern from this year's survey. And doing that, I was able to see that initial concern that consumers have right now, it's less than it was last year, which kind of speaks to that growing awareness. And then the third slide, as we're comparing the concern that consumers have now from last year's survey to the concern that consumers have now from this year's survey. So yeah, that's the point there. I mean, it's definitely a lot to handle, but I think the point of those 3 slides, so respondents like lose concern in the EVs after experiencing the EV, and we're also seeing that concern is dropping just over time as well. So I mean, it all just kind of speaks to the education awareness around EVs, and kind of speaks to how people are just becoming more familiar with the concept of EVs, and they're loving their experience with an EV once they get one.
Excellent. And then we have a question about resources from David Walker. And he says, I'm confused about statistics for the YouTube, Reddit, Facebook, and online resources, as they are used by so many providers of information. For example, if an auto manufacturer or an EV posts YouTube videos, are those counted as YouTube or auto manufacturers?
Right, that's a good question. Yeah, so for the purpose of that question, so we kind of leave it pretty general. Yeah, I mean, in those cases, it's often I guess it is often up to the eye of the respondent. Our idea from it, so if someone sees a video on YouTube and they're counting that as YouTube, if someone goes to an auto manufacturer website, for instance, and they're counting that as a manufacturer use. So that's a really good question, though, to help kind of differentiate between the two. So I appreciate that question.
Yeah, and then we have a question from Paul, who asks, can you comment as to how the current administration, which is clearly anti-EV, affects this report and what we see changing in the coming years? And I'm going to go ahead and answer this question, is that we can't really speak to how it impacted this report. This data was collected January through March. So during the transition between administrations, what we do know is EVs are here to stay. Some of the provisions proposed right now in Congress could slow the transition and make it less equitable, but people with home charging and plenty of disposable income will have no trouble driving electric. And as we know, EV drivers love their vehicles. So again, EVs are here to stay, and worldwide, if we zoom out to that level, everything is transitioning towards electric. Now we have a policy question for Alexia from Jeffrey Davis. Will the impact over time with the likely switch over to the NACS standard and demise of the CCS charging port what will the impact be? Excuse me.
I love that you're thinking about this question because it means that you're thinking about the next step. So thank you for asking it. Um, I think that there's a lot of options when it comes to the changing connector types. I personally have a vehicle that uses a CCS connector, so I am in the same boat. When it comes to moving forward and aligning our connectors on a long-term basis, that's going to be a long process, right? There's vehicles on the road now that will be on the road for the next 10 to 15 years with CCS connectors. So we'll still see that charging infrastructure out in the wild, as I like to say. That being said, as we start to switch more heavily over to NACS, we will also start to see more what you call quote unquote native NACS connectors on chargers. Well, you can just pull up, plug into a NACS port on your vehicle with a NACS connector, and you're all set from there. The third option to kind of support this interim transition period is a series of adapters. And auto manufacturers and charging companies are working together right now to produce adapters that are vetted, that are safe, and that you can use at both from the NACS side to the CCS side and from CCS to NACS. And so that means that regardless of your vehicle type, whether it has a native NACS port or a native CCS port, you can acquire an adapter that makes sure that you can then charge at a charger with a different type of connector. So rest assured, you will have plenty of options. You will not be left stranded, and your vehicle should continue to work just as it does now for years to come.
And Alexia, follow-up question. What will owners of home chargers need to do with their J1772 connectors should they require a NACS EV in the future?
So like I said, that's where I think a lot of the adapters will start to come into play, particularly if you're not looking to make an investment on another charger, which I would imagine a lot of folks are not. And so that's where we will start to see a lot more adapters. That's also where we're going to see some really creative thinking on the part of automakers who are potentially seeking to put both NACS connectors NACS ports and CCS ports on the vehicles. So we actually might see a whole class of vehicles with both.
Okay. Nick, next question from Robert. Did the report suggest how users collected more information, whether that's on maintenance, navigation, automation, concerning EVs post-sale? In other words, what was a more continuing resource for drivers?
Yeah, good question. So the resources listed in that question, so we included that to be both kind of free research, but also kind of the post-stick research as well. So yeah, I think the ones that you see like up towards the top listed there, I think those are some of the more continuing resources that you're going to see. We didn't necessarily ask about like the post kind of like service resources, but it is something we can kind of consider to ask for next year too, to see if that does change. It's a very good question.
And another great question. I'm hosting a meetup of EV drivers tomorrow for beers. Any suggestions of key points to relate to them? So these are both existing and prospective EV drivers.
Yes. There are a lot of things here I'd recommend. I think we have a lot of data points in this survey that kind of suggests that EV drivers love their EVs, and that those concerns that people may have ahead of time, it's all concerns that are most likely going to be dropping over time as well. So obviously like don't like show like the entire 50-page report to them, but I would say like you can kind of open up to a random page, and I think you'll find information that supports kind of EV adoption. So I think the ones that I pointed out earlier, I think those are the ones that I would kind of definitely try to highlight the most.
And I
Great,
think
thanks.
just adding to that, oh, sorry, Lindsay, but just adding to that, one thing that I think is really helpful for folks to understand is that they can just give it a try. They don't have to make any long-term decisions without trying anything. And so one thing that I think is really important to communicate to people is not only you can get a lot of cost savings from these vehicles, it can really help you, but also you can try it with no pressure. And as we've seen from our survey results, the minute that people try an EV, they have a much better understanding of what that EV can do for them.
Let me add in one
Yes.
other thing, which is that what we found that the big thing that really kind of convinces people around EVs is number one, driving in the car, so taking people for a drive, and then second, just hearing about the kind of authentic experience of real EV drivers, just like hearing from you all about your actual experiences with the car. That's what people want to hear, not from a dealer, but from a real driver as to like, what's it like? What are your challenges? What are the issues?
Exactly. That is so true. We got a question from Keenan Taylor. Will there be questions considered in the future that focus more on which channels lead to high intent conversion of EV related purchases? So not necessarily the pre-purchase research stage, but the moment of truth and choosing an EV or charger or EV related service.
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, if I believe I'm interpreting this question correctly, I mean, I believe like we're asking about like what kind of like leads to them to like make the decision in itself. I mean, I think our data shows that, I mean, a lot of people do make that decision before they even go to the dealership at all. So I mean, I think there is a lot of emphasis put on that pre-research stage. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I think like that pre-research stage is very crucial. Then I think being able to support dealerships to kind of give them the knowledge to help kind of like close deals in those. I mean, I think that's also like very important as well here. So yeah, but yeah, it is something we can consider for the future. But yeah, I think there is a lot of emphasis put on that pre-research stage, and it's for a good reason based on the results that we have in the survey.
Thanks. And then Kat Bristow has a very wonderful request. Please define these technical terms. Great reminder. Alexia, go for it.
Great reminder, Kat. Appreciate it. I live in what I like to call acronym soup. So for the technical terms, I was referring to NACS and CCS. Yes, very ambiguous. NACS is called referring to the North American Charging Standard. It is colloquially referred to as the Tesla connector because it's the type of connector that Tesla vehicles and Tesla chargers use. And it is primarily what automakers have committed to moving forward. CCS, so that refers to what is called the combined charging system. That is a different type of connector and port. It's actually, because it's called a combined charging system, it's actually two different types of connectors, where the CCS portion allows you to fast charge at different chargers. And then there's a piece of the CCS charger that actually allows you to charge at level 2 chargers as well. The advantage with the NACS, or that Tesla connector that I mentioned, is that it's the same connector for both slower charging and faster charging. So it just makes it a little bit easier. But I hope that cleared up your question.
Yes. And then I'm going to group two questions together from our friend Rob Hankins and Will Voletta. What percentage of African Americans drive EVs? What's their income? And then is data available for lower income segments? And Nick, do we have this data handy, or is this something that we will be following up with via email?
It's not data that we have handy right here. It's something we can definitely get back to both of you on after the webinar.
Okay, excellent. And then we've got a great question from Richard, who says, how do you and we respond to all the EV myths that we see on the internet? We see comments and articles on EVs filled with myths of batteries dying, fires, lack of range, greater pollution for EVs. And we have a great resource on the Plug in America website. Our FAQs have been refreshed recently, and we have answers with sources to answer all of these myths and bust them. And then we are also doing more to put out proactive content on our social media channels. So things that you can share. And we're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and a few other platforms. So be sure to follow us and share our content. And then also we're always open to hearing what you are frequently seen in case it's not something that we're seeing. So please, please do reach out to us and let us know. Okay, let's see. We are coming up on time here, and again, we're getting so many great questions, and we're so grateful for them and your engagement and interest in this. Whatever we don't answer, Nick will be following up with in the coming weeks, so you will hear from us, if not today. Um, Great question here. What's the resale market like for EVs? And Alexia, I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I would say it's a good time to buy if you're looking for a used EV, particularly at the moment. There are a lot of really fantastic EV options that are coming in at relatively lower costs. Um, it does still seem like a competitive market, so vehicles with lower mileage or very attractive features are still selling for higher value. But I think it's a really good time to be a buyer for an used EV right now.
Yes. Okay. John Knox wants to know about charging stations. Thinking about the non-Tesla, non-Rivian public charging networks, like Electrify America, EVgo, etc. Among EV drivers, which stations are rated the highest? Do we
Yeah,
have
good,
any research on that?
yeah, good question. Yeah, we do have research on that. I'll plug the full report if you want that information very soon. Yeah, but it's certainly the information that we can get back to you on after the webinar because we do have it handy within the report itself.
Excellent. Okay. And then Karen Apple, thank you for joining us today. This will be the last question that we answer today. In regards to safety being high in the must-have category, do we think EV battery fires are a main concern of potential buyers? Our policy director wants me to share that battery fires are much less common than gas car fires. EVs are safe, if not safer than gas cars. Another plug to go to our FAQs. And we will also be putting out more information about fires in the future. We just had a wonderful internal discussion yesterday on the topic, and we definitely want to address any concerns that the public has. So we are here. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We will get this report on our website, hopefully within the next 15 minutes. So check back so you can download it, and we will get the recording up later today. You will have it in your inbox if you forget. So please don't worry. We will get it to you. And thank you so much for today.